Nolan Mercer wasn't just a name, it was a legend whispered like a curse in the highest tiers of criminal enterprise. If you'd heard it, it meant you were either too deep in the game or too close to getting buried. And even then, you probably didn't believe he was real. Because no one had seen him. Not really. Not his face, not his home, not even his shadow. In the underworld of high finance, where syndicates, cartels, dirty politicians, and elite fraudsters played chess with entire economies, Nolan was myth and nightmare rolled into one. They didn't call him by his name. They called him the Ghost Index. And those two words were enough to make hardened men go pale. While others pointed guns and flexed muscle, Nolan fought with algorithms and keystrokes. He didn't bust down doors, he erased foundations. He didn't shout warnings, he flipped switches and watched billion-dollar empires vaporize before breakfast. Shell companies, offshore havens, encrypted trails, he tore through them like paper, collapsing networks that had survived wars and regime changes. And he never left a footprint. Not one. Governments had files on him, thin ones. What little they had was redacted, fragmented, speculative. Some believed he was a rogue AI developed by U.S. intelligence. Others said he was a ghost hacker born in the ruins of the Berlin Wall. Truth was, not even the agencies who benefited from his work knew his identity. They got results, but never a return address. The only certainty? If the Ghost Index took interest in your accounts, your countdown had already started. What no one ever guessed was that Nolan Mercer lived among them. Not underground, not off-grid, but in plain sight like a shadow on a sunny day. To his neighbors in that quiet neighborhood just outside Raleigh, North Carolina, he was nothing but a soft-spoken financial consultant. Wore polos and jeans. Drove a sensible car. Picked up takeout on Thursdays. The kind of man you'd trust to water your plants while you're out of town. And that was by design. He was surgical in his anonymity. No digital slips. No paper trails. No online presence that couldn't be wiped in under 5 seconds. Everything down to his recycling habits was calibrated to avoid scrutiny. Because the greatest trick Nolan ever pulled wasn't crashing a Cayman Islands shell network, it was living as a ghost in a world obsessed with tracking everyone. The only person who ever got close to his real life was Alina. They shared over a decade together, vacations, arguments, routines, laughter. But even with her, Nolan never let the walls down completely. Not because he didn't love her. He did, fiercely. But because love didn't cancel out risk, it magnified it. And Nolan had made a choice long ago, protect her, even if it meant lying by omission. To Alina, he was just an overworked consultant, a man whose life revolved around contracts and time zones. He never gave her reason to suspect otherwise. Every trip was accounted for. Every excuse lined up. And he was always present when it mattered. Flowers on anniversaries, lazy Sundays on the couch, dinners where they shared more than silence. They were a picture of quiet domestic life. But behind that image was a man who had toppled governments in his bathrobe and ended international financial syndicates before lunch. Still, despite everything he knew about deception, betrayal, and the darkest layers of human behavior, Nolan never once thought to look over his shoulder at home. Because out there, he was the Ghost Index. But in that house, with her, he allowed himself to be something far more fragile. He allowed himself to be real. And that, he would later realize, was the only mistake he ever made. Just the rumor that the Ghost Index was sniffing around could trigger boardroom panic and offshore retreats overnight. Bankers called in auditors. CEOs ghosted board meetings. Dictators sent encrypted messages in full-blown crisis mode. Because when he locked in on an operation, it was never a warning shot. It was a countdown to collapse. And still, no one knew how he got his intel. Not a trace. Not a breach anyone could reverse engineer. Some speculated he had his own AI. Others thought he had inside agents embedded in every major financial institution. The truth? Nolan Mercer was the breach. He didn't need help. He was the system no one saw coming. But all that brilliance, all that control, none of it prepared him for the one threat he never factored into his risk model. Betrayal. From inside his own walls. Nolan had brought down entire syndicates, spotted laundering patterns with just 2 decimals off, and traced stolen funds across 7 currencies in under 6 hours. But none of that helped when the threat wasn't encrypted or buried in offshore ledgers. It wore a familiar smile. It slept beside him. It poured his morning coffee. It was Alina. For over a decade, his home was sacred. The one place he didn't dissect. He let himself believe in something simple, that he could live one life in the light and one in the dark, and keep the two separate forever. With Alina, he was just Nolan, the attentive partner, the quiet man with his coffee routine and slightly worn suitcase. And that separation wasn't just convenience, it was protection. He told himself he was shielding her from danger. That secrecy kept her safe from enemies who would tear him apart to get to his weaknesses. But deep down, he knew it was more. He'd needed, a part of his life to remain untouched, pure. So he kept her in the dark. She never questioned his absences, never pressed about the specifics of his consulting work. His covers were airtight, his demeanor consistent. They shared dinners, holidays, vacations. He remembered anniversaries. He was never distant enough to draw suspicion, but never close enough to slip. Until the silence cracked. It began with small inconsistencies. And for someone else, they might have meant nothing, a missed laugh, a misaligned story, a moment of disconnection. But for Nolan, every twitch, every blink, every beat out of rhythm triggered his instincts. He didn't want them to, but they did. Alina, the woman who'd always moved with predictability, structured routines, measured reactions, began acting differently. Distracted glances, misplaced smiles during quiet moments, questions answered too quickly or too vaguely. He noticed her touching her phone more often, slipping it into her pocket when he entered the room. The casual openness they'd once had evaporated. And intimacy shifted too. It became heavier. Not colder, not distant, worse. Forced. Overcompensated. She kissed him harder, lingered longer, touched him like someone with something to prove. But beneath it all, he felt her mind drift elsewhere. Her eyes didn't match her gestures. She was there, but she wasn't with him. Nolan recognized the signs. He had seen it 1,000 times from 1,000 criminals trying to dodge guilt. The pattern was identical: distraction, overcompensation, secrecy. Only this time, the subject wasn't a foreign asset. It was his partner. He tried rationalizing it. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe it was age, monotony, internal battles he wasn't privy to. But the part of him that operated on patterns and probabilities refused to stay quiet. His mind went to war with his heart. He debated confronting her, but every instinct screamed for confirmation first. So he made a decision. He deployed a protocol he had never intended to use inside his own home. A false lead. A fake trip, complete with dummy emails, planted calendar events, a phony client contact. He kissed her goodbye with practiced calm, told her he'd be in Dallas for 2 nights, then slipped into a secure hotel 20 minutes away and opened his laptop. This time, the mission wasn't global. It was personal. It was surveillance on her. And Nolan Mercer, the ghost index, had never lost a trace. The fake trip was crafted with the kind of precision Nolan usually reserved for international operations. A fabricated business opportunity in Phoenix, a series of falsified emails exchanged with a shell company, an official-looking contract stored on a cloud server only he could access. Everything was set to be verifiable from the outside but hollow on the inside. He kissed Alina goodbye, longer than usual, just enough to read her eyes. She smiled, wished him safe travels, and asked about the flight time. Not a flicker of suspicion. That, more than anything, confirmed it. Nolan didn't board any plane. Instead, he drove 15 minutes to his safe-house apartment he used for emergency extractions. No one knew about it, not even government contacts. He entered the dim room, pulled the blackout curtains tight, opened his laptop, and entered the operating environment where he felt most alive. The first step was always surveillance. Passive, silent, untraceable. He activated a dormant trace already embedded in her phone, something he'd installed years ago, back when his paranoia still served him as a defense mechanism. In less than 5 minutes, he had full access: GPS, microphone, message history, and more importantly, call logs. Within moments, his eyes landed on the first anomaly. A number, always the same one. It showed up at odd intervals: lunchtime on a Wednesday, midnight on a Sunday, short calls, sometimes long ones. No name attached. Just digits. And Nolan knew better than anyone, unsaved numbers don't mean nothing. They mean everything. With a few keystrokes, he initiated a full scan. He tapped into telecom data, matched SIM activity, linked carrier metadata to subscriber history. Within an hour, the name surfaced like a file dragged from a swamp. Jason Hale. The name hit like a cold gust of wind. Nolan paused. That name, it didn't belong in his life. Not in any known circle, not from any recent past. He dove deeper. Public records, military service databases, old social media traces. And there it was, Jason Hale, former Marine, served 6 years active duty, 2 tours overseas. No criminal record. No financial irregularities. A clean man. Too clean. But Nolan wasn't looking for criminal records. He was looking for connections. And then, Alina's name started to appear. Indirectly at first. A tagged photo from 8 years ago, Jason standing near a lake, holding a fishing rod. In the background, a woman with auburn hair, wearing a sundress Nolan instantly recognized. Another post, 3 years old, a vacation picture where her reflection was caught in a car window. A comment under a mutual friends thread, where Jason replied with an inside joke only 2 people would get. The signs were scattered like breadcrumbs, and Nolan picked up every one. Alina had a history with him, one she'd never once mentioned. Not in a story, not in a passing joke, not in a single conversation over the 10 years they'd been together. That silence spoke louder than any confession. Nolan sat back, heart thudding, not in panic, but in a cold realization. He had faced betrayal before. Agents turning on agencies, allies becoming informants. But this felt like a toxin running through his blood. He wasn't just hurt. He was activated. The precision of her deception made him question everything. Had she been planning something with Jason? Was this emotional? Physical? Strategic? Was there a deeper motive, or was this just about comfort, lust, nostalgia? One thing was certain, this wasn't a coincidence. Alina didn't just reconnect with a man from her past. She kept him a secret, maintained contact behind encrypted apps and burner schedules. And if Jason had re-entered her life now, it was with purpose. Nolan knew that better than anyone. People don't resurface without intent. No shadow moves without casting one behind it. Back in the hotel, he cracked his knuckles, refreshed his search console, and prepared for Phase 2. Full digital dissection. He wasn't just going to find out what was happening. He was going to dismantle it, piece by piece, before it could destroy everything he thought he knew. And even then, he still hadn't seen the worst of it. But the more Nolan peeled back the layers of Jason Hale life, the clearer it became. There was no villain in the data. No red flags. Jason's record was so clean it almost irritated him. Former Marine, honorably discharged. Quiet job in logistics. Sparse digital presence. No large transactions, no burner phones, no shadowy links to anything illicit. He even paid his bills on time. It was infuriating in its simplicity. And yet, Nolan couldn't ignore the cold truth this brought to light. No algorithm, no surveillance grid, no deep skin could ever quantify what a human heart was capable of hiding. This wasn't about corruption or criminality. It was about something far worse. Choice. A choice Alina had made. Not coerced. Not blackmailed. A willing, secret betrayal. Nolan was still poring over Jason's metadata when a new alert pinged on the screen. A live message had been sent. Jason received it. Nolan rerouted the sync. He read it the moment Jason did. My husband is traveling again. We can meet today at 7, at the Verde Mare restaurant. The words burned onto his screen. His hands hovered over the keyboard, but his mind had already shifted to tactical mode. Time. Location. Conditions. He was in motion within minutes. Nolan arrived at Verde Mare nearly an hour before the scheduled meeting. The place was dimly lit, a quiet Italian bistro nestled between office buildings, not flashy, not crowded. Perfect for hiding in plain sight. He picked a table in the far corner, back to the wall, eyes on the entrance. From his briefcase, he retrieved a compact surveillance kit. Microphone synced, lens calibrated, recording activated. He adjusted the angle subtly, aimed at the entrance and dining area. Then he waited. The first car pulled up. Alina stepped out, dressed casually but carefully, just enough effort to suggest this meant something. She adjusted her hair using the car window, then walked inside. Her face glowed in a way Nolan hadn't seen in years. Not since their early days. It made his chest tighten with a cocktail of rage and heartbreak. Jason followed seconds later. They embraced outside the restaurant door, not rushed or awkward, slow, familiar. Too long for old friends. Too intimate for first loves. They took their seats, ordered drinks, shared a toast. She laughed, touched his arm. He leaned in, whispered something that made her smirk. Nolan watched it all, his face frozen in a cold mask. His eyes, however, burned with quiet fury. They were living a moment stolen from the life they had promised to build together. They behaved like people who had waited years to be reunited. Every glance, every smile, every casual touch between them was a betrayal spelled out in body language. There was no hesitation, no remorse, no signs that either of them believed they were doing something wrong. That was what killed him the most. He let them finish their second glass of wine, watched her laugh again, a sound that used to be his favorite music. Then, slowly, silently, Nolan closed the laptop, turned off the camera, and stood. He walked straight toward their table. Neither of them saw him until he was right there. The silence at their table shattered like glass. Alina turned first. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. Her mouth fell open, and her face drained of color. Jason froze. Blinked. No words formed. Nolan looked at them both with the same gaze he had given embezzlers, war criminals, and traitors. Calm. I see. Final. I hope you're enjoying this, he said, his voice low, razor sharp. Because it's the last time. And then he turned and walked out. No screaming. No drama. Just a clean sever. By the time they gathered the courage to follow or speak, Nolan was already in his car, the engine humming beneath the weight of everything he'd just witnessed. His mind was already shifting into execution mode. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to plead. He was going to vanish. He entered the house with clinical calm, grabbed 2 hard drives, plugged in his private terminal, and ran the protocols he never thought he'd use. Red folder. Exit. All bank accounts linked to his alias accounts began to cascade, transfers into non-traceable holdings, currencies spread across decentralized platforms. His digital footprint started disappearing, byte by byte. IP scrubbed, DNS trails burned. Socials deactivated. This was not an emotional meltdown. It was a tactical withdrawal. By the time Alina picked up her phone, Nolan, number was dead. Not blocked. Not ghosted. Non-existent. And again, always the same thing. Call after call, straight to voicemail. A digital void where her panic echoed back at her like a hollow scream in an empty room. Each failed attempt only deepened the reality that Nolan was gone. Not missing, gone. Vanished like a whisper. Meanwhile, Nolan executed what would be his final operation. But this time, it wasn't some corrupt tycoon or a faceless cartel. It was personal. Every step was precise, every action rehearsed. He shut down accounts across 5 different jurisdictions, moved funds through dark channels he'd crafted over years, and scrubbed every trace of his digital existence. Data that once defined his financial empire, wiped. From offshore holdings to local bank accounts, from secure apps to encrypted storage, he dismantled his life like a pro taking apart a weapon. Everything he owned gone. Liquidated, closed, or rerouted to places no one could trace. Investments? Dissolved. Real estate? Never existed under his legal name. Retirement funds, crypto wallets, gold reserves? All extracted and sent into the deep. The man was a phantom by morning. And strangely, it was easier than any of his past missions. There were no obstacles, no firewalls too strong, no enemies watching because he was his own target. This relationship had no legal ties, no messy court paperwork. The house? Leased under a shell name. The car? Bought through a secondary company registered in the Caymans. Their joint financial life was an illusion. Alina had relied entirely on Nolan, never asking questions, never imagining a day it would all be stripped away. And now she would pay for that blindness. That night, while she frantically dialed his number over and over, Nolan was already on the move. He left the hotel, dropped off the grid, slipped into a pre-booked flight under a fake identity. By the time the sun rose, he was halfway across the globe, passport encrypted, identity erased, life reset. He didn't even look back. In the following days, reality hit Alina like a slow, grinding wreck. Her credit card stopped working. Bank apps threw errors. Login attempts failed. She reset passwords, tried recovery questions. Nothing worked. Her name wasn't linked to anything. Panicking, she searched for financial documents, statements, tax returns. Every paper she found led back to Nolan. And now, none of them mattered. On the 4th day, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. It was the property management company. The voice was sterile, uninterested. The lease had ended. Nolan hadn't renewed it. She had 5 days to vacate the property. She tried pleading, blamed an oversight, claimed her husband was handling it. But the voice remained cold. There is no contract. There is no payment. There is no extension. With panic creeping up her spine, she called the only person she could think of, Jason. When he picked up, her voice broke. She unloaded everything. Nolan had disappeared. She was broke. Homeless. She didn't know what to do. His response came sharp. Alina, I live in a 1-bedroom place. You wouldn't even fit here. That sentence struck deeper than she expected. And suddenly, clarity hit. She remembered who Jason had always been, the noncommittal man, the thrill-seeker, the charming one-night whisper. He never wanted a future. He was a detour, never a destination. And now, when she needed someone to save her, he just reminded her how alone she truly was. With no choice left, she crammed what little she could into 2 suitcases and returned to the one place that still had a bed for her, her mother's house. She arrived in silence, dragging the weight of her choices behind her. No excuses. No illusions. Just shame and the bitter taste of consequence. As for Nolan, he became what he always was, a ghost. There were no news stories. No sightings. No reports. He didn't exist in any known system. And maybe that was the plan all along. Maybe he's sitting in a dim cafe somewhere in Montenegro, or watching the coastline in Portugal, sipping coffee while planning the next downfall of another empire. Or maybe, just maybe, he's done. Because when the most dangerous man in the shadows decides to disappear, not even love, not even revenge, can find him again.